He got in there and somehow broke out and flung himself out of a window. I have no idea how he got rid of the handcuffs. He got away. Floyd ended up running up the hill with a machine gun, took a couple shots at the deputies. That sentence was never served.
Had to jump from a moving train.
You know, he's still wanted for escaping from his 12 to 15 year sentence. Charlie was the second person to be named public enemy number one. You know, when he was in the Wellsville area, at one point they got in a shootout with the Wellsville chief of police and two of his erstwhile deputies. And Floyd ended up running up the hill with the machine gun, took a couple shots at the deputies, and the gun jammed, and he had literally tossed it under a rabbit hutch. Because I don't know if you've ever picked up a Thompson, but I think they weigh about 16 pounds. It would not be something you'd want to carry if it wasn't useful to you.
Right.
So he dumped it. And one of the neighborhood children who was still living at the time I got interested explained to me how the neighborhood kids found the gun under the rabbit hutch. And this guy was still mad that they took it off of him. So he thought that he should get to keep that, but the FBI ended up with it. So,
well, where? I mean, let's start, if you don't mind. We kind of
no,
start
not at all.
at the beginning of his life. Like, what?
Okay.
You know, where was Floyd born, and what was his full name? I know his mom didn't name him Pretty Boy.
No, definitely not. The actual name is Charles Arthur Floyd. And the Floyds were from northwestern Georgia, I believe Bartow County. They were farm people, country people. At one point, I saw some suggestion that there was some distant connection to a Confederate general whose name was Floyd, who was singularly unnoteworthy in what he did for the Confederacy. But there may be a connection there. But the family had moved to Oklahoma. A lot of times they're compared to the Jodes, you know, grapes of wrath kind of thing. Although I think the Jodes were moving from Oklahoma to California when they were made famous in Steinbeck's novel. But there are a lot of comparisons. You know, they were not well-to-do people. Although I did find it interesting in talking to some of the nephews, who unfortunately have all passed now, that Charlie is the only one in the family who ever was convicted of any serious crime. In fact, one of his brothers, after Charlie died, became the sheriff of Sequoia County,
Right.
Oklahoma. And one of the nephews was an accountant. And I remember him being very interested in the fact, and I kind of quizzed him. I said, nobody else was quite as colorful as your uncle. And he said, oh, absolutely not. Now, his father, who was Walter Floyd, had kind of a tragic end. He was shot by somebody that he was disputing with about some personal property. Father and his wife had a store across the street, and they got into this confrontation, and the Floyd left, and the fellow that he was arguing with had a .410 shotgun cut off, and he plugged him, and he staggered across the street into his store and died right there. Now, I had always heard rumors, and I think you'll still hear them, that Charlie had just gotten out of prison at the time his father was killed. And a lot of the writers suggest that, you know, he took care of things after the law failed to do anything to the shooter. In fact, I was reading just this morning that people still show outsiders the remnants of an old well that is supposed to be where Charlie dumped the body of this guy. He was tried for the shooting. This Mills was his name, and they acquitted him. So that might be an interesting one to look into. But
Why
he
was I'm sorry.
no,
Why was Charlie? You said he was getting out of jail. Why was or prison? Why was he in prison?
well, he Charlie's criminal career started when he was 18 years old, and he robbed the local post office of $350 worth of pennies. So that's going in at the deep end. But because of his age, they put him on probation, or first time offender. Basically, did not throw the book at him. But then that would have been in 1922. After that, Charlie, who did not like farm work, and this was tough times for farmers after World War One. But the only thing he could find to do was to rent himself out, at harvest time, and travel around with other such young men to help major farmers with their products, their harvesting. And he really didn't like it, from everything
Right.
I've read. And what he did like is kind of the sense of freedom that he had. And as frequently, young man doesn't like the 9 to 5 type life. He made connections that were not ultimately beneficial to him. And so at one point, sometime in 1925, he and 2 other similar guys robbed a Kroger payroll office. And they did better than $350, but they were also immediately caught. And Charlie was sentenced to, I believe it was 5 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary. And they had let him out on good behavior after only 4 years. So he was in the Jefferson City Penitentiary in Missouri, which I've seen pictures of. The inmates wore stripes, and the ball and chain was frequently imposed, and it wasn't something he really wanted to ever go back to. And he had just been released from prison when his father was murdered. So
Okay.
it fits the tale telling to say, yeah, Charlie, let the law try to take its course, but they failed, so he took care of it. But again, Michael Wallace did a lot of research on this in Oklahoma and said there was absolutely no truth to it as far as, some kind of revenge killing. So Charlie was, by that time, some of the writers think that he learned from other criminals while he was in the Missouri prison. And it certainly didn't show him the path to redemption, because he went right back to his old ways, and he got involved with other criminals. One thing about Charlie is that you never get the sense he wasn't, with the mob or anything like that, at least for most of his career. He was kind of a rural independent, and he would work with various other people. Of course, some of those people didn't have very long lives after they hooked up with Charlie, and several of them that were killed during these early years. For example, and what surprised me when I first started to look into this is he really did get around. He was robbing banks in Colorado. He had come to Ohio previously, and in fact, his first major bank robbery was in a little town in northwestern Ohio called Sylvania, and he knocked off the bank there. And then in May of 1930, he was arrested in Akron, Ohio. They were looking for him because of that Sylvania bank job, and they caught him. He was hiding under a bed in a questionable place, and
Establishment.
yes, and they caught him, and they sent him back to Toledo for trial, and he was convicted again. And what's kind of interesting to me is if he was sentenced for 12 to 15 years in the Ohio State Penitentiary. And, had he served that, you and I wouldn't be talking about this.
Right.
There wouldn't be another colorful story for Columbiana County. But he was actually on his way to Columbus with the officers. He was handcuffed, and he talked the officers into letting him use the restroom in the train car that they were in. He got in there and somehow broke out and flung himself out of a window. I have no idea how he got rid of the handcuffs, but he got away, and got away clean. And the next thing you knew, he was back in Oklahoma. So that was the last time Charlie was ever in police custody.
Right.
And I say that sentence was never served.
Right.
But
He still had to jump from a moving train. That
Yeah.
couldn't have been. But I guess that beats doing 12 years in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Ohio State penitentiary at that time was certainly no Club Med. I mean, it was every bit as bad as the Missouri penitentiary, probably worse, although he wouldn't have known that. So he escaped from that. He went back, and throughout his years, not that there were that many of them, there's always this tendency to go back to Oklahoma, the Cookson Hills, and Aikens, Oklahoma, and a little town called Salislaw. That was his home place, and he just always used that as his place of refuge, no matter where he was.
Base of operation, kind of.
Yeah, well, that's where the family was. So his mother, in fact, his mother lived a long life. His brothers, most of them lived to be elderly. But
sorry, I was wondering, how long is his? I'm just curious. How long was his crime spree?
Well, if you start with the Kroger robbery, which was 1925, and then roughly 4 years in prison, gets out, may or may not have gone after his father's killer, but the family,
who knows,
said it didn't happen. And then the Sylvania bank job. And then the next thing that he did is he was back in Ohio. Supposedly he murdered two brothers in March of 1931. Their names were Wayne and Wallace Ash. And the reason for that, some of the authorities seem to think that they were snitches and that he did them in because of that. But what is absolutely established is that one of the Ash brothers was married to a woman that Floyd was interested in. And for the rest of his life, he was in close proximity to this woman and her sister. So her name was Ash, but she and her sister's maiden names was Baird. But they were frequently with Floyd and his various associates. So they were with Floyd the next year in 1931 when he was in Bowling Green, Ohio, and they were casing a bank, getting ready to rob it.
So these weren't two school teachers.
No, not at all. And according to the probably the best account, Beulah was probably the one that gave Charlie his nickname, because the family to this day refers to him as Charlie or Chalk.
Right.
And Chalk was apparently a type of beer. I don't know if it's a manufactured type or something homemade, but he liked Choctaw beer. So that became his nickname. But he was labeled as Pretty Boy by one of the Baird sisters. Different stories, that the police, when he was a young criminal, they said he was a pretty boy. One of the more colorful stories says that a Kansas City madam said, "Well, you're too pretty for these other girls. I'll take care of you myself." Probably not true, but you'll find that anything with Charlie Floyd, there's going to always be another interpretation coming down the pike.
Right.
And other women. But the Baird sisters were with Charlie when he was in Bowling Green, Ohio. And his associate then was a lovely fellow named Bill Miller. And I have found out since then that Bill Miller, whose nickname, he had a better nickname than Charlie, he was Billy the Killer Miller. And that family came from just across the county line here in the Ohio River Valley. They were from Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And Billy earned his nom de plume, or whatever you want to call it, because he murdered his own brother over a woman. The brother's name was Alabama Joe Miller, and
these women are causing problems.
Oh, they're causing trouble. They're causing trouble. So he was definitely in the available rabble that Charlie could run with, and he was with Charlie in Bowling Green. A local officer saw that they were clearly up to no good and approached, and the net result was that Billy was killed on the spot by the officer, and then the officer, whose name was Kastner, was shot either by Miller or by Charlie. But so the bank never did get robbed, but they had to flee Ohio again. He went separately from the Baird sisters. They had to make their own way home. So they seem to be talented at that.
So was he just going, like, was he robbing these banks out of necessity, or do you think he was like he would run out of money, rob another bank, run out, was he a paycheck to paycheck bank robber, or was he, you think, or was he just going robbing banks every time there was an available bank? He was just robbing it.
He certainly wasn't loath to rob banks. I mean, he some of the accounts estimate that he robbed 50 banks during his career. I think that's probably high, but he hit quite a few.
Right.
And and of course, it's the same kind of thing as with the Daltons and the Youngers and the James boys. If you're robbed, you don't want to be robbed by some lowlife. You want, the big guys to have been the perpetrators. So there were some banks that he was credited with robbing that he may never have even seen.
Right.
But there were certainly enough of them. And so after this, he's still wanted for escaping from his 12 to 15 year sentence. He's wanted for the killing of Officer Kastner in Bowling Green, and there were other officers that one of the accounts said that during his career he killed 12 people, 9 of whom were police officers. So that would certainly keep him in front of the gun sights of any of the police. And then after this incident in Bowling Green, he went back to Oklahoma, found a new partner by necessity, and continued on a string of bank robberies throughout the Midwest. Which
right.
I was going to make a list of them, but I just ran out of time yesterday. So and it probably wouldn't be that interesting, but there were a lot.
What I was going to say is, look, even if it's half of the 50, 25 banks is a lot of banks.
That's a lot of banks.
A lot of banks.
A lot of banks. And, he made a name for himself. But the thing that really brought him to the forefront of the criminal world was something that he denied he did. He denied it immediately after the event. His other newer partner denied that he was involved with it, and it was totally unlike their other normal activities, which is to go in these rural banks or small town banks and make a quick haul for a couple $1,000s, if that. But in 1933, Charlie was accused of participating in a major gangland incident. And again, this is unlike him because he was not mixed up with the mob,
right,
for the most part. And I don't think he was at all, but he was blamed for this. And what happened is that there was a uh, federal convict named Frank Nash who had escaped. I'm amazed at how easy it was to escape custody. But Frank Nash was in prison on a federal rap. He was like a bookkeeper for the mob. He had escaped and then got recaptured. And they were in the process of taking him back to prison. And the suspicion is that higher ups in the criminal world did not want Frank to be able to go back and be interviewed at the leisure of the police and the federal authorities. And they wanted to spring him before he was back in behind bars. So they knew somehow, probably some cash applied to somebody that had variable morals. They knew that he was going to be passing through the Kansas City Union Station while they were taking him back to the prison he had escaped from. And at any rate, there was, while they were transferring him, or the car pulled in with Nash and an FBI agent and a couple local detectives were with him, suddenly these other gentlemen appeared and opened fire. And they opened fire primarily with Thompson machine guns, submachine guns. Not the best item to use if you're trying to do precision work to free somebody in a car. And they killed the FBI agent. They killed two of the local deputies, and they killed Frank Nash. So if they were trying to spring him, they did a bad job of it. And they didn't really catch anybody at the time. We know that Charlie was in the Midwest. He may have been not far from Kansas City, but he actually wrote to the government and said that I just want it known that I had absolutely nothing to do with that.
Right.
Do you believe a guy that's robbed that many banks? I don't know. They didn't believe it, but
well, he didn't seem. Was he shy about mentioning other crimes that he had committed?
I don't think he ever denied being involved in any of them. He,
right.
He'd always put a positive spin on it, and that was kept up by his family for decades. And one of the other fellows who was alleged to have been involved with that was a fellow named Adam Richetti. And that Richetti was Charlie's newest partner, if you will. And I guess what I would say is that after that, everybody was after him.
Right.
This put him in the forefront of the criminal world. And in fact, you probably have heard about, the idea of public enemy number one, which was really a publicity thing that J. Edgar Hoover dreamed up, but it was a good one.
Right.
You pick out the worst guy in the country and say, he's number one, we're going to get him. And that's great as long as you get him.
You're right.
And the first one to be named was Dillinger. So Dillinger, died on a sidewalk in Chicago outside of a theater. And so that left the titled position open for the next comer. And that was Charlie. Charlie was the second person to be named public enemy number one. So, and he only held that title for 3 months until
they caught him.
Well, until he came to Columbiana County. But now after the Kansas City, they called it the Kansas City Massacre, which I guess killed 4 people with a machine gun. That probably qualifies.
The Kansas City Massacre thing, though, that's the one that actually made him go on the run. And he was with Adam Richetti at the time. And Adam and him, and they had a couple gun malls, a couple girlfriends that they traveled with, Rose and Beulah Baird, and they were sisters. And they hooked up with them at some point between Oakland or between Kansas City, and then they left. When Floyd found out they're after him, now for this thing that happened in Kansas City, he and Adam Machete hooked up and they went to Buffalo, New York. So they end up and they take Rose and Beulah with them. So they go up to Buffalo, New York, and they hide out there for like a year, and they don't do anything. They don't get in any trouble. They don't rob any banks. They just lay low up in Buffalo, New York. And after that year, they decided they're going to try to go home. They want to go back to Oklahoma. So
maybe they forgot about it.
Yeah. Well, after a year, and they still didn't catch them. So they're going to try to make their way back home. And so the Lincoln Highway was huge, at that time. That was the main thoroughfare to get you across the country, was the Lincoln Highway. Still is today. We just have different names for the roadways today, But Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, they come back through, they decided, well, Floyd gives Beulah, who was his girlfriend. Rose was Adam's girlfriend. But they give Beulah money, and she goes and buys a 1928 Chevy Coach, blue in color, and it was a really nice looking car. And she buys it, and they decide they're going to drive back. So they start out towards like Lake Erie, and they come down. Today it's Route 11 southbound, which was Route 30 then, and the Lincoln Highway, and they just come down through. They really have no ties to East Liverpool per se, but the Lincoln Highway comes right through here. So they end up coming down through, and it's a Sunday morning, about 3:00. And East Liverpool, Ohio is right on the river. We literally are a river town. We're 2 minutes from West Virginia, and we're 5 minutes from Pennsylvania. So we are actually a tri-state area in essence. I mean, you're able to go to 3 states here in a minute from each other, a couple of minutes from each other. And so Route 30 turns into Route 7. It's still the Lincoln Highway. And right here in East Liverpool is where that exchange takes place. And they're headed towards Dillonvale, Ohio, which is Steubenville. Okay, we've heard of Steubenville. Dean Martin from Steubenville. So they're headed that way. It's on the other side. It's the north end of Steubenville is Dillonvale. And Adam Machete has a sister that lives there. Her name is Minnie Sushik. And the idea was that they were going to hook up at Minnie's house, probably get food, gas up, do that kind of thing, and then head right down through Bridgeport, Ohio, which brings you to the southern states, right down I think it's Route 70 or 76. It all hooks up there. And that was their route to Oklahoma. But what happened is, when they come through East Liverpool, and there's a little town 3 miles down the road from us called Wellsville, Ohio. And it's you could almost throw a rock and be in Wellsville from here. There's Route 7 went down. It actually has a name for the road at that section. It's called Kuntz Avenue. And they were driving through there. It's 3:00 in the morning. It's foggy. And Floyd's driving the car. And he hits a telephone pole, and he breaks the axle on the car. Okay, can't see because of the fog from the river. We still get it like that here. And so he hits a telephone pole, and he breaks the axle. So he and Adam Machete take the bedrolls. They carried bedrolls with them everywhere they went. And they took those, and there was a hillside there. We know it as the Silver Switch. Now, at that time, there was a brickyard that was right there at that intersection, and a working brickyard, and it's called Champion Brickworks. And there's a hillside there, and a house or two up on top of that hillside. So they climb the hillside with their bedrolls and their guns, and they hide out under a section of rocks that's up on that hill. And the girls are going to get the car taken care of and then come back and get them. Okay. So it's 3:00 in the morning, so nobody's really open, but Beulah walks to Wellsville, and there's an all-night service station there that has a tow truck. The service station is just a gas station, though. They don't do repairs. So she does get the tow truck. It comes back, and they bring the car into East Liverpool, where there is a all-night service station. They actually have men working there. So the axle is going to take, they don't just have an axle for a car like that. So they had to wait. till earlier in the day and go get it. So the women never get to see the men again. They end up staying with the car down there. And throughout the morning, there's a couple men right there. That hillside is the spot is still there today. You could go. I think it should have a historical marker put there. But anyhow, you could go and see exactly where they hung out. And they waited and waited and waited, and the girls never come back. And two men, now it's daylight. It's 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and two men are coming down the street. His name is Joe Fryman and his nephew. And they're coming down. There's pear trees on that hillside. And they have them wrapped up. It's October. It's this time of year. And they're going to check on their trees. And they see the men up there. So they walk up to the men, and then they see the guns. Floyd has a Tommy gun and two 45 caliber pistols in his waistband. And Adam Machete has a 1911 45 pistol in his waistband. But they start talking to him, and Floyd comes up with this story that they're only there to get pictures taken, and they're waiting for their girlfriends. And so the guys buy it, and they said, well,
to get pictures, like are they saying that, are they telling them who they are? And we're here to get, like, we're not.
No, nobody knows who they are. They're just two men, and they got guns. And it wasn't uncommon,
Right.
The Tommy gun, during the war, the Tommy gun become really famous. But prior to that, like, the Tommy guns come out like in 1928. They were a big thing because of like World War I. They were trench getters. They were made to just destroy trenches. And these men brought them home with them, and people, they had them. So they have a Tommy gun, and you can't hide that very well. And
yeah,
so
even in the bedrolls, which I was going to say, it's not uncommon for people in that era to walk around with bedrolls because they had nowhere to stay, and you're basically like a hobo, you're homeless, and so it wasn't, it would be like a sleeping bag.
Yeah, exactly. And so they were just hanging out up there at the rock area. But the men that talked to them, they buy the story. They said, we're just here to check on our pear trees. And Floyd says, well, if you see the ladies down at the bottom of the hill, send them up. And so they walk away. Well, the men didn't quite buy it. Okay, right. Not all of it. So what they did is they walked back up towards their house, and that house that Floyd and Machete are at, right above them is a house. And it's still there today. It's not in very good shape, but it's there today. That's the home of Lon Israel, and he was just a neighborhood guy. Everybody knew him. And they went and they ran into Lon, and they said, "Hey, there's a couple men down over the hill from your house up there hanging out, and they're sleeping up there, and they got guns." And so Lon Israel decided, well, I'm going to call the chief of police in Wellsville, because that area is actually Wellsville. So his name was John Foltz. Now let's break there for a second, because I got to tell you about John Foltz. This guy's a character. You could do a whole story on John Foltz himself. Prior to being a policeman, he would build boats on the river. He was a shanty boat builder, so he actually would build these houseboats along the riverbank, but he would haul the prostitutes up and down the river to different encampments. And as he built the boats, he would take a boat and take the prostitutes around, and he must have made money doing that. But this is prior to him being a policeman.
Right.
So, it was kind of odd. Even during Prohibition, I've got pictures. Matter of fact, I even brought it today, but I have pictures that where all the whiskey stills, when they would do the raids of the whiskey stills and the crates and the barrels, and since the street in Wellsville by City Hall is lined up with these things. And his job, after the tax revenue guys would leave, was to destroy all that. And what he would do is go around and sell them back to them. So he's a character, this guy.
Right.
And that's, now he's chief of police.
I was going to say, was he elected chief of police?
I don't know how that worked back then. But
you say he ran a campaign. Then he used the money to run for chief of police, and things got even better.
Well, I'm sure the moonshiners probably helped pay his way. But he's actually a heck of a guy if you think about it. So leading back to Lon Israel calling him, he says, I'll get there as soon as I can. I'm working by myself at City Hall. So he deputizes a prisoner he has in jail. His name was Grover Potts. This guy later kills somebody and ends up killing himself too. But this is years later. But at this time, he's a prisoner. He's in jail. And he deputizes him and says, "You're coming with me." And another man named William Irwin, who was a pretty good guy, and he's there cleaning City Hall or working around City Hall in Wellsville. He deputizes him too. And so he doesn't give him any weapons. He's got a 32 caliber pistol, 5-shot, just a little pistol. It's nothing. And he's got that tucked in his waistband when he goes to find out who these men are. Now, Law and Israel said they have guns, but again, it wasn't uncommon to have a gun. So,
Right.
And they don't have a clue who they are. They're just two men up on the hill. So they could have been hunting for that matter, you know. So he goes over and he hooks up with Joe Fryman and those guys, and they point their way, and he meets up with Law and Israel. So now you have Chief Fultz, Law and Israel, Grover Potts, and William Irwin. So there's 4 men, and they get up to Law and Israel's house, and there's a pathway down to where Floyd and Ricchetti are. And he says, well, we can get to them this way easier. So they go down the pathway. Well, Chief Fultz is leading the way, and out steps Floyd with a 45 and says, put your hands up. And Chief Fultz, again, this guy, he's such a character. He says, why would I do that? I'm just going to work at the brickyard. And he says, keep your hands where I can see them, and nobody will get hurt. So they're all coming down the path now. You got 4 guys coming down the path, and there's Adam Ricchetti laying on his bedroll on his side. And Fultz says to him, it looks like you're taking it easy. And Ricchetti said, yeah. And Floyd said, don't listen to him. He's a police. Shoot him. And all hell breaks loose. So now you've got Chief Fultz with that little 32 pistol, Floyd with a Tommy gun, two 1911 45 pistols, and Ricchetti with one. And 2 guys with nothing, 3 guys with nothing, because Lon Israel's there now. So you can imagine the melee in this is a high weed tree section as well. So there's just chaos as the gunfire starts. This goes on so long of them shooting at each other and using the other people for cover, and nobody wanted to shoot the guys who weren't armed and shooting at them. So they're trying to shoot around them. That the 3 men who are unarmed get to Lon Israel's house, which is only a few feet from them, and they get shotguns, and they come back and join the fight. Chief Fultz with that little 32 pistol. So Floyd's trying to get away at the top of the hill. He's trying to run up the hill and get away, and Grover Potts shoots at, he's got a double-barrel 12-gauge shotgun, and he shoots at Floyd, and we find out later that Floyd has 1 BB in the small of his back, and that probably comes from Grover Potts. But he shoots at him, and Floyd turns around and shoots Grover Potts and gets him in the shoulder, and he's down. And the Tommy gun jams, so Floyd ends up tossing the Tommy gun, but he's still now on the run. Adam Ricchetti and Chief Fultz are at each other, and Chief Fultz chases Ricchetti right to Lon Israel's house and fires his last round at Ricchetti, and he misses him. But Ricchetti turned around and gave up. And so they capture Adam Ricchetti that way.
With an empty gun.
Yeah, yeah. And during that melee, Chief Fultz actually got shot in the ankle by Ricchetti. So they grab Ricchetti, they hook him up, they take him down, they treat Grover Potts, and they all go back to Wellsville. Floyd is on the run. He's now up on the roadway. It's called Peterson Road. It's still there today, and it looks different today. Back then it was a big farm field and area like that. Today the trees are grown up through there and so much. But Ricchetti goes back to Wellsville, and of course he's given a bunch of crappy names. You know, he's come up with all kind of different names for both of the men. Floyd's alias was always Frank Mitchell. So he threw that name up, and Murphy and all this. I just met the guy. So he gives them a line of crap. And that takes time. That's over time over there, because they're also treating Fultz and treating Grover Potts too. Floyd, in the meantime, has made his way up that hillside, and he's staying out of the roadway, but he's trying to get away. And he comes across, they call them machines. He come across a machine at a garage, a car, an automobile. So he comes out of the wooded section there, and he comes over, and that family were the Petersons. And the street's even named Peterson Road. And it was William and Thomas Peterson, and they had a garage in there where they worked on cars. And that's what they were doing. And there was a friend of theirs, his name was George McMillan, and George was there to get a part for his car. And Floyd comes and offers $5. He wants a ride to Youngstown, Ohio. And what he wants to do, his whole plan is to catch a bus. He wants to get on a bus that'll take him, down south. So he wants a ride to Youngstown. He offers $5. 1934, $5. You might as well offer them $1,000.
Right.
So Thomas Peterson said, hell yeah, I'll take you. Well, Peterson's mother comes outside and said, you can't go anywhere. The car you're working on has to be back across to Chester, West Virginia, which is right across the river, by 1 o'clock. This is around 12:30. So George McMillan is standing there, and Floyd says, listen, I'll pay you $10. Take me to Youngstown. And McMillan says, yes, I'll take you. So he has a little Model A, I think it was a 29 Model A. And so they jump in. Now, as they take off and go, again, I said earlier how I have the transcripts. I have the statements taken from these people. So I have George McMillan's statements. So I know every road that they took because he tells you in his statement that he did. The statements come from the coroner's inquest. Either Purvis or Hoover ordered our coroner at that time after the Floyd shooting to go back and interview everybody and get their statements. That's what I have. They took a stenographer with Mary Ann McIntyre. Little lady had a little box and she could shorthand, and she would shorthand all of the statements and then come back and type them up. I have those typed statements. So this is how we know what happened and where.
Right.
Every word said at the shootout on the hill, that's all in these statements and so on. So we know that now Floyd is in the car with George McMillan, and they're headed out, and we know what roadways they take to go. Meanwhile, back at Adam Rachetti, there was a sheriff in Jefferson County, which is the next county up the highway, and he come in just on business to Wellsville, and he sees all the chaos going on, and he sees Adam Rachetti and says, I've seen that guy before somewhere. So he goes out to his car and he gets a Burns Detective Agency book, which was just a mugshot book for bad guys across the country. And there's Adam Rachetti. There he is. And there's Floyd right with him. So this is how they identify who these men are. And it was a sheriff from another county that kind of just happened to come in and identify these guys. So now they know who they're looking for.
So that was his NCIC.
Yeah, yes, exactly. For that time,
right?
And just on a pause, I just recently there's a man in Arkansas that I get people call me from all over the country about Floyd, and they want to know this or want to know that. This man contacts me from Arkansas, and he's in his 80s, and his uncle had died, who worked here in East Liverpool at one time back in the 30s. And he was cleaning out his estate. He said, I've owned this place for years. I just can't get around to get it. And he finally does, and he finds these pictures. And so some of the pictures are of Floyd in all of this stuff. And one of the pictures he has, and he sends them all to me. He sent it all to me. But one of the pictures is this man standing there holding a Burns Detective Agency book. And I love the fact that may be that sheriff, or it may be another person that I've never been able to identify, and I think I have now. So I'm excited about stuff like that. But this man sent me some great pictures we've never seen of the Conkle farm where Floyd was killed. And we'll get to that too. But there's a lot of controversy about this farm and this area, and they're not sure and so on. But this is a great picture. It marks the spot right where he died, where he was shot, and but you could see the whole farm. And that's cool too, because we've never had a picture like that. So, and this guy just out of the blue in Arkansas sent me this stuff. Great stuff. But there's the sheriff, and he's identified him. So the fire chief of Wellsville is sent in a fire truck to go to Lisbon, Ohio. This is our county seat, and it's also where our sheriff is. Okay, and deputies. So they send him out to warn them to be on the lookout Somehow in that time, they find out that McMillan is driving, and they come up looking for him, and they end up at the Peterson garage, and they find out George McMillan has taken the other guy in a car. So now they're looking for this Model A car along the roadways, and they're headed that way. So they go to Lisbon. They outrun them in Lisbon in a fire truck, and they get up there and warn the sheriff's office, who puts a deputy with a policeman in Lisbon. So the deputy was George Hayes, and the policeman was Charlie Patterson. And George Hayes later becomes the sheriff of the county, but at this time he's just a deputy. So they get together in a car, and they block a roadway where they think they may come. And the place is still there. There's a restaurant right there called Pondy's, and it's been there over 100 years. And there's a bridge right in front of there, and that's where they make a roadblock. So some time passes, and here comes a car, but it's not a Model A. But it turns around quickly and takes off. What had happened is Floyd and McMillan run out of gas. So they're actually still in Wellsville. They run out of gas on a place called Township Line Road and Route 45. And so they get out of the car and they walk up to the backside of a man's house. His name was James Baum, and he's a florist in Wellsville. So his house has a greenhouse. He's outside working at the greenhouse. And they ask him for gasoline. He says, I got a brand new Nash. You can't siphon gas out of it, but I'll take you to get gas. Again, they have no idea who these men are. And McMillan's just along for the ride. He's not even, And,
he's trying to get his $10.
Yeah, exactly. So they get into the car, into the Nash, brand new car. They get into this thing and they start down the roadway, and Floyd's in the back seat, and he sits up and puts a gun to James Baum's head and says, listen, we're not going to get gas. I want you to get off the main roadway, and we're going to Youngstown, So they start that way. Well, Floyd doesn't know this area at all. And these men, pretty much, even McMillan, just drove him in circles. They did, these back roads don't lead to Youngstown anywhere near it. So, the roadways back then, the old Model A cars had the real thin tires, and they were big wheels. That's because the ruts in the roadways were from wagons. And so when you're looking at those cars and they're beating, going down this thing, I can't imagine crossing the country in one of these things, but they did it, and they're I drove this exact route in a car today, and it took me forever. And it was a rough ride in today's cars. So I can't imagine a Model A or even a Nash going through this way, but they did, and they start down. So here they come down towards Pondy's on Route 45. That car turns around because Floyd sees the roadblock. So he tells him, turn around, go back. So Deputy Hayes and Charlie Patterson see that car, and they thought it was odd that they spun around like that. So they go after it. So here we have a roadway called Stooksbury Road, and it turns into Roller Coaster Road. So as they turn off of Stooksbury, they're catching up to them. And then Roller Coaster Road they pull over at the Y at Roller Coaster Road and said, let that car pass us. And so the car doesn't. They pull up behind them, and Deputy Hayes says in his statement that if I wouldn't have bent down to get the door handle, I'd have been shot right between the eyes. Floyd opens fire on him, and so now they're shooting back. Here's a twist. James Baum, the guy who's an innocent guy, it's his brand new car, which ends up with a bunch of bullet holes in it. James Baum just tries to get out of the car and run back to the police, and they shoot him. They shoot him in the leg. Charlie Patterson shoots him with the sawed-off shotgun in the leg, puts him down, and he has nothing to do with anything. He's an innocent guy. And George McMillan, when Floyd gets out, he uses him for cover, and he ends up pulling him to the front of the car, and Floyd runs into the woods. This is his getaway.
Right.
That section of woods is called Spence's Woods because there was a farm there called Spence's Farm, and so they know it as Spence's Wood. And Floyd's gone. It's pouring down rain now. It's about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening. It's getting dark. It's this time of year, so it's getting dark out. And those guys, when they shoot Baum, they capture George McMillan, thinking he's part of Floyd's deal, and he's not. And he pleads with them that I have nothing to do with it. I just was going for the ride. I mean, he's going to pay me for a ride. They don't believe him, and they put him in the car, and they leave Mr. Baum laying on the roadway and said, another police car will come and get you. He's bleeding to death on the side of the road. So they put McMillan in the car and they start back. And eventually he convinces them that, listen, we had nothing to do with this. And so they turn around and they come back, and the neighbors are all tending to Mr. Baum. And so they get the story from them, there, and they ended up not arresting those guys. And but Floyd's gone. So when you see pictures of like all them posses lined up, and I don't know if you want me to show you this stuff or not, but I have pictures of the posses all posing with their guns, and you would think you picture pitchforks in the back of the pickup truck and stuff. That really happened. Right. Now they know who they're looking for, and the word's out. So you had guys just jumping in trucks and with their gun and their pitchforks and coming out looking for Floyd, but nobody will go in the woods.
Right.
Again, that's
of course they want to get him too. He's killed how many police officers? So the police are motivated to get this guy.
Yeah. Well, they want to capture him. They know who it is now. So he's public enemy number one, and here he is in our little area.
Right.
So,
it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's a big deal for them. So overnight, this Floyd's in the woods, and he makes his way. We find out later, and I have all the information. He follows the towpath of Beaver Creek, Little Beaver Creek, which is actually a scenic river, today, and it's a beautiful place. But he follows one of the towpaths to this, and he ends up the next morning. Now, this is, again, when he gets in the woods, it's 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, and there's a long way for him to go, and nobody's going in the woods. So what they're doing is those posses are driving all the roadways all night long and just waiting for somebody to pop out of the woods on the roadway. And Floyd, it's like 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. He pops out of the woods at a place called, it's on Bell School Road. The farmer's house was the Robinson farm. And the daughter, Mabel Robinson, and her dad lived there, Robert Robinson. And they're just farmers. And he pops out. He's filthy. He's hungry. And they have an apple orchard. So she's out dealing with the apples or the orchard. And he pops out and he asked if she would feed him. And she went in the house, and she wouldn't let him all the way in the house, but let him wash up on a porch. Had a couple sandstone steps right there, and he sat on the steps, and she made him 2 fried egg sandwiches, and she just made ginger cookies. So she brings him out a couple ginger cookies, the sandwiches. He sits on the steps and he eats them. And before he leaves, she gives him a couple apples from the orchard, and he wants to ride to Youngstown. And they don't even own a machine; they don't own a car at all, so they can't help him.
Right.
He thanks them, and he starts on his way. So. And that's significant later. I'll tell you why when we get to that too. But so he's on his way. About an hour and a half later, he ends up at the Conkle farm, the famous farm where he dies. Okay, so but it takes about an hour and a half. He comes to the back door of the Conkle.
Was this the woman that he gave the money to? The one that just fed him?
Not that woman.
Okay.
He didn't. There's no there's no information that he fed or paid these people. Yeah. But they took care of him. They let him, wash up. They don't know him from who. They just figure he's a tramp, So while this is going on, now that posse that's out, and after he leaves the Robinson farm, and now it takes about an hour and a half of him staying off of the main road and hiding in the weeds as he's traveling. Robert Robinson, the lady that fed him's dad, is talking to the neighbor. And the neighbor, his name is Clyde Birch. And Clyde Birch is a constable for St. Clair Township Police. And he knows what's going on. And so when Robert Robinson was talking to Clyde says, you got to get in my car. We got to go tell the feds who are over, they're just 2 miles down the road. So, and he knows that. So they get in the car together. They drive over to what's known as the White House filling station on Route 7. And they hook up with 2 federal agents, and they tell him, "Hey, listen, this guy's a stranger, but my daughter just fed him over on Bell School Road." So those agents, again, to take a step back, Melvin Purvis has now arrived here. Okay, so he's in town now. He flew in from Chicago. He was actually in Chicago, and so he took a quick plane, which was a half-hour flight, to get here. So he and a couple other agents are already here, and they've already tried. Let's go back to Adam Ricchetti. They tried to go and interview Adam Ricchetti, and Chief Foltz, the character, he won't let them. He says, "You're not talking to him. We're not letting anybody talk to him. They shot me. He shot me, and he's going to go to jail over that and get go through court before anything else happens." And Melvin Purvis is telling him, "Listen, we need, he's wanted for the Kansas City Massacre, all this other stuff, and they won't do it. Foltz will not give him up for anything." And today that's different, as well as I do. The FBI just take over, but they didn't do that back then. They didn't have jurisdictional power like that.
I was going to say, I think there was even, were they even allowed to carry weapons unless?
Well, they were there at this time. This is where that all started. It was with these bandits like this that they started carrying all that stuff and training how to use a Tommy gun and so on. Hoover started after Dillinger's deal. They started all of that kind of training. So they become what we know as the FBI. Back then, they were just bureau agents. They were attorneys.
Yeah,
they were all attorneys with guns. So they trained and they learned. But so here's Foltz, and he's not giving him up for nothing. This character, and so Purvis gets so mad at him, he ends up coming to East Liverpool, and East Liverpool is a much bigger city at that time. We're actually a happening place at that time. East Liverpool, Ohio, was a pottery capital of the world. At one time, we had over 200 potteries working at one time here. So most people have never heard of East Liverpool, but you have. You just don't know it. If you flip your dinner plates over, they're probably Hall China or Homer Laughlin China. You heard of Fiesta ware. That's all us. That's all made here. So most of your fine china was PS&T and KTK, Knowles, Taylor Knowles China. That's all made here. So that was our industry. It was the pottery industry. That and the steel mills in Midland, Pennsylvania, Crucible Steel, and so on. That was our only industry here. So we were a happening, booming town. President McKinley and President Taft would vacation here. That was at that time. That was this place was a really big place. Happening. So anyhow, Purvis ends up at. We have a hotel called the Travelers Hotel, and he made that his home base, his headquarters. And there's a big historical sign there today telling you that, but the hotel's still there. So he sets up there. Well, those agents, when Robert Robinson and Clyde Birch show up at the gas station, they get a phone and call Purvis at the Travelers and tell him, "Hey, we think we know where he's at. He's out here." So Purvis turns around to an agent who's at the Travelers and says, "Listen, get a hold of the East Liverpool police and see if they can send some guys out to help us." This is the only reason East Liverpool's involved in this at all. All of this other stuff has happened outside of East Liverpool, but this is what gets us involved in it. So they make a phone call up to City Hall. Our police chief is Hugh McDermott. He calls in Chester Smith, Herman Roth, and Curly Montgomery. And these are the four guys that, matter of fact, these are the four guys right here that they end up calling to go help. Okay, so those guys get into a car. Chief McDermott gives out the weapons. This is how we know what, in their statement, who's carrying what weapon. So Chief McDermott has a .38 pistol, police special. He gives Herman Roth and Chester Smith a .32-20 Winchester rifle, and Curly Montgomery is carrying a 12-gauge shotgun. They get into a car. There's no Tommy guns involved with the city police, So although we owned two of them at the time, they just didn't know what they were getting into, So they went armed like that, and they get into a car and they make it out to the White House filling station, and the feds are gone. But the people at the gas station said the car was loaded with a couple guys. They just went down the road. So the city guys catch up to Melvin Purvis and his guys, and there's four of them. There's Melvin Purvis, Agent Hopton, Agent Hall, and Agent McKee, all in that car. And so they honk at them, stop them. They find out that Curly Montgomery knows all of the farmers out that way. So he says, "Listen, follow me. I know all the farms and how to get to them." So they do. So the city police is leading the way now. And you got two cars, loaded down with, and you can see them hanging on the floorboards, and stuff like the running board. So they're headed down the highway like that, and they're just going farm to farm now, trying to catch up to the guy that they fed at the Robinson farm. In the meantime, now back to Floyd. Floyd ends up crossing the roadway there, Bell School Road. He crosses the roadway and makes his way to the Conkle farm. He sees a machine in the park behind the corn crib. So he makes his way to the back door. Ellen Conkle is a widow. She's in the house, and he knocks on the back door and tells her he was hunting and he got lost. And she didn't buy it. She's a farm, she knows better. He's in a suit.
I was going to say he's probably he's probably wearing a suit.
Yeah,
holding a Tommy gun.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't have.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He lost that back there.
But you're not hunting with a 45.
Yeah, no, and two of them, as a matter of fact. So he's got two of them tucked down in his belt, and then he could tell that she realized he's not telling the truth. And he said, "To be honest with you, I got drunk and I got separated from my brother, and I'm just trying to find my way back." And so she lets him in, and he's hungry. The 2 egg sandwiches wasn't enough. He's been on the run for a couple of days now, or a day and a half. So she feeds him 2 pork chops, some mashed potatoes, and some rice pudding. And he doesn't like the rice pudding, but he tells her that this meal was fit for a king. He left it. This is where he pays her the $1, and she doesn't want it. This is a farm lady that could use it, and she doesn't want it. But he put it under the plate for her anyhow. And there's talk of that later, where she kept the $1 and framed it and so on. Once they find out who he is, but he's just a tramp to her. He doesn't know. Made her nervous though, and her brother Stuart Dyke is out in the field with his wife Florence, and they're husking corn out. It's a cornfield, so they're out there working. And he asked her. He says, "I'd like to get a ride to Youngstown," and she says, "Well, I don't drive, but my brother can maybe take you, but we'll have to wait for him to come in." And he asked for the newspaper and a book of matches, and he says, "Can I wait by the car?" And she said, "Sure." So he goes down and gets in the car. They think that he was going to steal it, but he doesn't. He gets in the car, and Stuart Dyke sees this guy, over by this car. So he stops what he's doing. He goes to Ellen Conkle, and he's talking to his sister, and she said, "I don't know who he is, but he's kind of strange, making me nervous. He wants to ride to Youngstown." And it's now 5:30 in the evening again, and Stuart Dyke isn't going to drive to Youngstown. That's actually a good drive, especially back then. So he talks to him, and he's asking for the ride to the bus. And he says, "I can't take you that far, but I can take you to Clarkson." And Clarkson's a little town 2 miles down the road. So he says, "Okay." And he says, "There's a bus that comes once a day to Clarkson." So he's good with that. So they get into the car, and Stuart Dyke's wife, Florence, gets in the car too. And they're going to ride down the street a couple miles and take him there. And just as now today, if you go out to the Conkle farm, which we get a lot of visitors out there, and there's a historical sign, of course, now. And even today you can do the QR code and it tell you the story. But today it's a big horseshoe. You can come in and go out, it didn't exist like that then. So the car's parked behind a corn crib, and he's going to back up to the garage and then go out the driveway. Just as they back up, here comes our guys. Both police cars pull into the farm because they're going farm to farm.
Right.
The farm prior to this was the Anderson farm, and Mr. Anderson's out in the field, and they stopped and asked him, "Have you seen anybody?" And Anderson said, "I saw a stranger walking in the field down below." And they said, "Well, how do you know he's a stranger from that far away?" And they said, "Because he didn't have a hat on." And men wore hats back then. And you didn't. That was out of the realm. So that actually gave him away more than anything, just not having a hat on. And so that prompted them to go to the next farm, which is the Conkle farm. And so as they start to back out, here come the 2 cars, and Floyd orders Stuart Dyke to park behind the corn crib again. So as he pulls up in there, he gets out of the car. And Stuart Dyke's actually cussing him now, because now he's got his gun out, and Stuart realizes this guy's a bad guy. And they don't know who it is. Now the police do, but Miss Conkle and Stuart don't have a clue. So they can see, now our guys see him, and they get out of the cars. And if you can picture this, you got 8 men now. You got 4 city and 4 feds, and they're all out. Now they're circling that corn crib. And Floyd decides to take off and try to make it. There's a garage right there. Tries to get behind the garage, and he's headed for the woods. There's a wooded section behind the house, and he's trying to get to it. And he never one time shoots at him. He's kind of running zigzag, as you can imagine, and he's just trying to get away. Floyd is very athletic. He's 30 years old. He's built like he moved the car when they run out of gas by himself, and those cars weren't light, So he's very athletic and very fast, and he's trying to get away. And as he's running out there, they yell for him to stop, and he doesn't do it, and they open fire on him. And later, Ellen Conkle says there had to be 100 rounds fired at him. But there's never any talk that the Tommy guns, there were 2 Tommy guns used by 2 of the feds, and there was never any talk that they were used fully automatic. Okay, but you could, a hail of bullets is going on, and Floyd goes down, and he gets up, and he runs maybe 15 more feet, and he falls again, and he stays down. The guys catch up to him, and Curly Montgomery actually takes the pistol out of his hand, and Herman Roth, the other policeman that gets there, takes one out of his belt. And so they start talking to him, and Purvis comes up, and this is where a lot of controversy comes in. But Purvis comes up to him and says, "You're Pretty Boy Floyd." And he said, "I'm Charles Arthur Floyd, you son of a bitch." And he used other language too throughout. He cussed him a lot. And he said, he's tried to question him about the Kansas City Massacre. And he said, "To hell with the Union Station. I wasn't there." And he's dying. I mean, he's shot.
Right.
So there's backstories to all of this, but Floyd, they open fire on him, and you got 8 men shooting at him, over 100 rounds, and he's shot twice. He's hit twice, but he's got 6 holes in him. So this is where my CSI people come in and say, "Okay, wait a minute. He's shot twice, but got 6 holes." So he's running, and one round actually goes into his forearm and comes out his forearm. Right. It goes into his side and out of his side. So he's got 4 holes. That's with 4. One round, and the other one's actually in the side too, and comes out a little higher in the back. And that's actually the one that kills him. It takes out his pancreas and ribs and some other stuff in there. So he's bleeding out is basically what he's doing there. They try to question him like that. Well, Purvis, when he starts cussing Purvis quits questioning, and he gets Stuart Dyke, Ellen's brother, and one of his agents, and they take off in the car, and they go to Clarkson to use the phone. They said they were going to call an ambulance for him because he's alive. He's laying there alive. So they're going to call an ambulance. But what Purvis does is he gets to the phone and he calls Hoover, and he tells Hoover that I got him. And this is right after. This is a month almost to the day of getting Dillinger. So he calls Hoover and he tells him, "I got him. We got him here in Ohio." And he comes back, and in the meantime, our chief, McDermott, and a couple of the policemen are talking to him. And McDermott says, "How bad are you hit?" And he says, "You got me twice. I'm going." But he asks about Ad, meaning Adam Ricchetti. He called him Ad. And then he said it again, but he called him Eddie, like Etty, Eddie, for Ricchetti. Right. And he just wants to know about him. And then he asked who tipped him off, how you found him, and he ends up said, "I'm going," and he dies. So he lived 10, 15 minutes after he was shot, and Purvis isn't even there. Purvis is up the road calling Hoover. So they pick him up and they carry him down towards a roadway, and they put him under a tree, and that's where they're waiting when Purvis comes back. And he said, "Oh hell, just put him in the car and we'll take him back to Liverpool." So they prop up Floyd's body in the back seat of a car, and the 2 city policemen sit right beside him in the back, holding him up and drive him down to East Liverpool. And which is,
definitely a different time.
Yeah, I don't want the car now. It's full of blood in the back seat. But Floyd, they take him down to the funeral home at the time was called the Sturgis Funeral Home. Ernie Sturgis was the funeral director, and Ernie wasn't around. So the other funeral director's name is Frank Dawson. So Frank Dawson ends up taking the body in. And now you can imagine, again, the excitement of this. Here's public enemy number 1. The word's getting out that, here's Floyd, and we got him, and he's dead, and we have him here in town. And people started coming. And so they hurried up, and Frank Dawson hurried up and embalmed him when they should have autopsied first. And instead they embalmed him and they sewed him up. And so there was always a controversy about what size of round had hit him, who shot him. Not that it mattered, but it did to them. They want to know if the FBI killed him or the city guys killed him. And we have one guy in the city, Chester Smith, the tall guy in the picture I showed you. He claimed he did it. He claimed, I'm a marksman. He was a marksman in the war. And he claimed I shot him with the 32-20 Winchester rifle in the arm purposely because he knew Purvis couldn't, who he met 10 minutes prior to this. So, and we rebutted that. That's part of the reason we wanted to do this. I wanted to film these transcripts, not the grandma stories. In 2 years' time, I found out that Pretty Boy Floyd drove through East Liverpool, Ohio. He ate everybody's food and he shot everybody's barn. Okay. So everybody's grandmother fed Floyd. It's those kind of stories, and I still get them. And so I wanted to film the documentary based on the transcripts and not all the stories. There's a lot of backstories and a lot of little things that I found out as I was doing the research that those family stories were true. There really was. This is how I found out Mabel Robinson. I didn't have any pictures of this woman. I had no idea. And I spoke to one of her family members, and he said, yeah, I've got pictures of her. And my grandmother, she used to tell us exactly what she fed him. And so we got information from the family stories.
I'm sure every time she made like whatever she made, she's like, that's the same meal I served.
That's it. Watch your back.
Yeah. Floyd ate it. He loved it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, he grew up with those stories, and, you hear them and you kind of blow it off after a while. I get so many people, everybody I talk to. And the man, one of the men that helped with the film, Dave Dunlap owns 28th Parallel Productions. That's the man that was with me at the Crime Con. And I met him through another documentary that we filmed called 759 Dresden about a murder that had happened here. It's a cold case here. So we filmed that documentary. And while we were doing that, I said, I'd like to film something on these transcripts. So we end up doing that. And we brought in the president of our historical society. His name is Tim Brooks. He's an attorney, just retired. But he's also a historian for the city. And he was the go-to Pretty Boy Floyd guy. And so he's been published in different magazines and stuff. And Tim actually come in, and he has all of the story of Floyd growing up. So that would be that side of Floyd. If you wanted to know anything about him as a kid or what he did, Tim Brooks would be the guy. So there was the three of us. And when we put this together, and then like I said, I spent 2 years researching those transcripts, every inch of them. So I knew exactly where, and I went to those places and we found stuff that people had no idea still existed and so on. So it turned out really good. It played in Amazon Prime. It's played in the movie theaters here locally. And I sell those DVDs constantly. So I don't know if you got one when you were down there, but I'll send you one.
No, I don't even know how would I even play a DVD.
See, that's what we're running into.
Yeah.
Nobody has a DVD player anymore, but you can put it in a computer. It'll play in a computer. And actually, if you have a hard drive.
Yeah, I was gonna say you need to sell SD cards.
Yeah, well, that's our new thing. We're streaming. The first documentary we did we stream that.
Right.
The problem with streaming this one is it has special features. And we don't want to leave them out. Like you can actually read the transcripts in the DVD. So if you put it in a computer, you could read it word for word. And when we were talking about James Cagney and these guys earlier, they really talk that way.
Yeah,
I'm going to fill him full of lead. And when you read these transcripts, they're talking about that. So it's fascinating to just to read them alone. But the whole story of Floyd, he's just a different kind of gangster. I do have a picture, which is fascinating. And just to touch base on this, I got a young picture of Floyd posing with Clyde Barrow.
Okay.
And that's unique because Floyd didn't want anything to do with gangs and that. But Bonnie and Clyde tried to get Floyd to run with him. And he didn't want to do it. And they were young then, but he didn't want to do it. But they got a picture together. And that picture you only see it every once in a while out there. But I have it in my collection, and I love that picture because it's kind of that you see a young Clyde and you see a young Floyd, and they're both dressed to the hilt with their fedoras and posing together, and it's pretty cool.
What about the mask, the death mask? You showed me the death mask at CrimeCon.
I've actually got one sitting right there. So there's let me finish with Floyd in the field. They take him down.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. They take him down to the funeral home, and they start doing this right away, and they put him up for display in the window. And once the word gets out to his mother in Oklahoma, she sends a Western Union telegram back saying, please don't show him. Send him to a reputable funeral director and send me the amount of money it's going to cost to send his body back to Oklahoma. Floyd had $122 in his pocket. Now, that's a lot of money, 1934. Yeah. He had $122 in his pocket. He had a black onyx ring on his finger. He had a pocket watch that on the end of the pocket watch has a coin, and that coin has notches in it. And that it was like a dollar, like a silver dollar. And that it had 10 notches. Floyd had killed 11 men, but there's 10 notches in this coin. And they believe that's for every man that he killed, and he just never got to do the 11th one. But they have that stuff. So all of that stuff shipped back home. Later, we get to meet Glendon Floyd, who is Floyd's nephew. And he would come back to East Liverpool, and he would do talks. And he would sign autographs and tell you stories. And he would bring all that stuff with him. And stuff, which was pretty cool, pretty fascinating. But the death mask. So while Floyd's in the funeral home, again, I told you the history of East Liverpool is the pottery industry. So they called, I believe it was Homer Laughlin, China, they called the mold maker to come over from Homer Laughlin and, or maybe Hall, China, one of the local potteries. And he come over and the masks are made out of what's called slip. Okay, slip is what makes your coffee cups and your saucers and dinner plates. It's a liquid, and then it's formed, and pressed, and then they fire it. Well, this particular mask I have behind me is a second. It's not a first. The very first mold, when I say that, the very first mold broke. The very tip of the nose stayed in the other half when they took it apart. It stayed in there, just the tip. So they went ahead and made 5 masks out of that mold and gave them out to like the chiefs of police and the people that were involved. And then from there, they moved that mold off to the side and they put plastic over Floyd's face and poured the slip over it, made a whole nother mold. And that's what this is. Okay, right. This mask. And the nose on this one is smooth. And that's how you can tell the difference. So if you ever come across the Floyd mask, it's got a rough tip of the nose. It's probably one of the first 5 originals. Now, Tim Brooks, as I mentioned earlier, he has one of the originals. And then also in Wellsville, Deputy Hayes, that was involved in the shootout with him, he was given one of the first original masks. And when he passed away, his estate sale, they had that mask for sale, and a local policeman bought it, and it's on display in Wellsville. But that's an original mask. A lot of people don't realize what death masks were for and why they did that. And they actually go back to the 17th century. They did that stuff. They made it out of clay then, and they would do that because now back then it was just to honor whoever. A lot of times it wasn't everyday folk that they did that to. It was somebody influential. But you could get it done if you had the money, to do that. Later, like at this time, they would do this, and like I can't imagine grandpa's face on the mantle, but right. You could have it if you wanted to, And
the whole thing is morbid, like propping him up so everybody can come by and see him, and all this stuff it seems morbid now, but what's morbid, back then it's there's lots of things that we would go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would do that. But
if you think back in the Victorian ages, they would wire a dead person back up with children and pose with them for a picture. And not everybody could afford photography when that was out. So this was a cheaper route, and you had something to remember your loved one by. Yeah. So you kept it and you displayed it, somewhere. But I get in trouble for the pictures I have of the dead guy laying around everywhere, so I can't imagine then, with a death mask on your mantle, but they did that. Abraham Lincoln has a death mask. Matter of fact, while we were filming this documentary, Tim Brooks gets a call from the FBI, and they want a copy of Floyd's death mask. And Tim said, well, I sent you one 20 years ago. And they said, well, they can't find it or whatever. So Tim sent one of his to the FBI. They made a mold of it or a copy of it. And in return, they sent back a mold of John Dillinger's. And so I have that now in the police museum. Tim thought that would be cool to, put it in the police museum. So it's on display there, which is morbid. You see the scars in his face when he hit the pavement. They killed him in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And when he fell on the sidewalk, it busted open his cheeks. And the scars are still there on it, on his death mask. So, but it's pretty cool that I have it. And people, they love that stuff. Dillinger was a different kind of guy. Dillinger was bad news. And, he not that Floyd was a good guy, but in realms of bad people, he did what he had to do. And
right.
Dillinger did things he didn't have to do. Babyface Nelson was just crazy. George Nelson was his name. And that's who they went after Floyd. He was the next public enemy number one, and they end up killing him, shooting him in a ditch somewhere. But two of the agents that were involved in killing Floyd were also killed by Babyface Nelson. And then there's a little backstory about Nelson didn't like Floyd at all. And he even says in between after Floyd died and before they got Nelson, he's quoted as saying that it's a good thing the feds got him, because if I ever run across him, I'd kill him myself. So he didn't like Floyd for whatever reason, but he was another one.
Did Floyd not like the name Pretty Boy?
He got that name. There's two stories about that. One, he was actually a very handsome man, and he was short, stocky, but he was athletic, and he had rosy cheeks. And so a couple prostitutes, one of the stories,
right.
A couple prostitutes had said how much he's a pretty boy, and it stuck. And he didn't like it. He didn't like being called that at all. And that's quoted throughout that, nobody wants to be called pretty boy and be a gangster, I guess.
Right.
But he, and then the other was just young girls that he did know when he was growing up, called him pretty boy. There was talk that he hung out in the houses of ill repute
right.
at times, so but again, he was so well liked. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what he did. Anywhere he went, he was taken in. If you ever see the movie Public Enemy?
Yeah.
With Johnny Depp? It's so historically wrong, I couldn't watch it.
Right.
It drove me bananas. Because the opening scene shows Melvin Purvis shooting Floyd in an apple orchard with a long gun, and none of that happened.
Right.
And it didn't happen before they killed Dillinger. It happened after Dillinger. So even put the killing of Floyd at the end of the movie, now you're a little more historically correct. And it just drove me bananas. I couldn't do it.
Well, what's funny too is like, how hard is it to just get the accurate, even the types of gun, like they always do that. And it's like, why wouldn't you have just gone with the real story? Oh, well, we changed it. But I get you watch some movies and they'll combine characters or they'll combine scenes, because you can't fit 10 hours of that person's life in 2 hours. So
right.
Some things just get eliminated and some things can be combined. But when you're just manufacturing scenes completely that didn't need to be manufactured, like would have taken the same amount of time to use the correct equipment.
Yeah.
How hard is it to find a Tommy gun? How hard is it to find
right.
Those things are available.
There's even today, there's a part of the museum, part of the police museum, and what my goal is besides educating, locals and educating children, I like to get it out there a little bit further. It's like what you're doing for me right here. This is great. This is networking to the best as far as I'm concerned. And part of the thing is, like, I just had a guy come in. He's been involved, and I don't know all of it, but he's been involved in a Pulitzer Prize writing or article or a book or what have you. But he's very well. He writes very well, and I don't know if he's the one that got the prize or he's just involved in a story that did. But either way, super nice guy. He come into the museum and he wanted to do a story on Floyd. So I get interviewed all the time like that. So I told him whatever he wants to know, I'll tell him. And I did. And then he called me a few times and he said to how, he needed this information or that information, told him. And then I get the article, which is very well written. And I love it. And it's part of the Ohio History Connection, which is a big, for museums, it's a huge thing and a huge deal. It's in there. And the one guy, the McMillan guy I told you, that drove Floyd everywhere, it's well documented about McMillan and all kind of stuff. And he calls him McMullen. And that drives me bananas. It's like, how can you do that? His name's not McMullen. And all through it, McMullen. And there is a family, which I didn't touch with you, but there's a family of McMullins, but they were women, and they owned a barn in Floyd. When he was going down that towpath and ends up at the Robinson farm, he goes through their farm to get there, and there's one little article about them, and they're the McMullins. And so it's like, that's confusing to somebody, so it's not right. And it's not so bad, but it's not right, and that stuff drives me nuts.
Well, cool. Well, listen, is there anything else you feel like we didn't touch on, or?
No, I mean, if you want to visit the East Liverpool Police Museum, I mean, it's free. It's
Right.
I have a donation box and an old call box that you drop, whatever you want in there, but you don't have to. Bring your family, call me, get a date, and we'll set it up. And, it's all about educating, people. So it's a lot of history of the city along with the police department. It's a lot of fun. We have, you can dress up as a gangster and get your picture taken, get your mug shot taken. We do that kind of stuff. It's a little interactive, and people come from everywhere. So if you're in this area ever, if anybody is, and you want to do it, hook up with me, and call me. You can get me at the East Liverpool Police Department or St. Clair Township. I spent 22 years as a policeman for East Liverpool, and the last 4 years was St. Clair Township, which is still East Liverpool. It's just a little township outside of us. And so I'm an active policeman, so I'm not hard to find.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching the interview. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so you get notified of videos like this. Leave me a comment about what you think about the interview, and check the description box. And we're going to leave any social media links or any links to the story and to the museum. So I really appreciate you guys watching. See ya.